And now for our English session on moving towards net zero. So now without further ado, allow me to introduce your speaker on stage, the Executive Director of Consulting, Deloitte Southeast Asia, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Terence Foo ขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับท่านด้วยค่ะ
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you and Kapung Krap. Right, so I'm Terence. I'm from Deloitte Consulting Southeast Asia. I run the supply chain and network operations practice for us in Southeast Asia, and it's my honor to be here to speak to you about the topic of moving to net zero. And being able to attend the conference and the exhibition has been great because there's so much enthusiasm and so much energy I can see that we want to move Thailand and the bigger Southeast Asia towards net zero. And it was great to hear from CP Food about decarbonization, it's about reforestation, all this great stuff, right? So hopefully today, when I share with you what I'm going to present in the next 30 minutes, we'll give you some ideas of how Deloitte is helping companies like yourselves and also individuals to move towards net zero. So I will be covering 3 topics. The first topic is very close to my heart, is why now? Right? I think everyone knows that climate change is upon us, right? There's no doubt about it. And every one of us has a responsibility as a human, right? As a father myself, my daughter keeps asking me, what do I do? So when I tell her that, oh, I do supply chain, they say, oh, what's that? They are like 14, 16, 18. But I say, oh, I'm helping companies to reduce wastage. I'm helping companies to reuse. I'm helping companies to recycle. Then they get excited because it's a big topic in discussion in school about how individuals can support companies in being net zero, right? So why now? From a corporate perspective, I'll cover some, and it's not rocket science, it's not new news, but it's good to have always statistics to remind us it's so important for us, for our companies, and for the broader ecosystem, right? Next, I'll cover sustainable supply chain management. It's a big topic. As you can see, to get us here, there must have been a big supply chain behind it to move everything here. All the water you have, all the good stuff you have is all supply chain, right? You can't run away from supply chain. So I'm very happy to be talking to you about sustainability in the supply chain. And last but not least, nothing beats having some case studies of what have been done. Maybe we are still slightly behind. I'm sure we'll catch up. Some of the case studies I have is global, but I really hope next year or very soon we have case studies that we can talk about in this part of the world, right? And I'm pretty confident because we are already in the midst of doing some good stuff that we will be able to put into case studies to share with you, right? So why now, right? As consultants, we like to give you statistics, we give you numbers, right? So if I can put your attention to the numbers here, is we have been doing a lot of surveys, and it was great again to see companies putting forth sustainability reports, right? So it is definitely right at the top C-suite agenda. Unlike maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I think it's very clear now that everyone knows it's our corporate citizenship and agenda to be sustainable. But what is more interesting is consumer, right, are now demanding that products are sustainable, right? So we have companies saying that, hey, look, how do I track my carbon emission? Not just scope 1, scope 2, but also scope 3. And that's the most difficult part of finding out who's your supplier and what are they doing, right? So in my area, one of the things we are focused very much on is operational efficiency. Because a lot of times people say, oh, sustainability is something that we must do, but the business case is not there, right? Perhaps it may apply to some areas, but I can say for sure it doesn't apply to supply chain. Because the first thing in supply chain we do, which I'll share later, is to reduce. So if you can reduce a truck movement, you are adding to the goal of being net zero. Because if you plan better, if you buy better, if you produce better, you reduce that extra journey, extra last mile, you reduce obsolescence, reduce write-off, you're already being sustainable, right? Of course, it was not called sustainable when I started my career 27, 30 years ago, right? So, but it was interesting that what I was doing, or what we were doing, like-minded people, supply chain practitioners, hopefully here, has been towards the sustainability agenda. So that's the broad level, okay? let me just cover another angle. This is interesting because having children of teenage age, right, teenagers, they always ask me, okay, in their schoolwork, what is really the big deal about climate change, right? So just put some statistics. Again, as I said, everyone is aware. What does climate change do to us, right? It increases the temperature. And it's very clear, you know, the statistics here may be a little bit old, right? There was 5-fold increase in weather events, but the latest was Hurricane Ian just hit Florida, right? And unfortunately, recently there was a case of flooding in Pakistan, and there's flooding all over the place. I mean, I still remember there was once I was in Thailand, I fell asleep after a very tiring meeting. I woke up and suddenly I realized that I was in a river. I said, did the car drop into a river? Then no, one of my colleagues here said, you know, I'm driving. You're driving? Why is the water around me? Right, but anyway, for someone like me who come from Singapore, it was experience, but for you, probably it's like, okay, it's normal. I'm learning, right? But it's real, right? There was severe drought. The impact is still not hitting us yet because it affected the harvesting, it affected the planting, so we're probably going to see some of the effect in the supply chain soon, right now, food supply chain, all the droughts that we have seen, right? And definitely energy was a big problem when climate change, right? Some of the hydropower didn't work, right? So I'm sure I'm speaking to you, the converter, because you make a point to come here to listen, right? Which means you know we can't run away. We can't run away from the corporate agenda of sustainability, of moving to net zero, right? Okay, so Deloitte does a lot of research, right? One of the things we have done is what we call turning point, right? Where are we now in that journey of turning back the clock in carbonization? The world has been spending a lot of time in this one-way supply chain where we just get resources from the earth and then we happily make good stuff here for us to be feeling comfortable. I always tell my daughter that we are living in a very comfortable age because each of us are little emperors, right? Because if you look at history, for someone who is very rich, right, in the old days, they take a lot of people to service them for them to have luxury we're getting today, right? So that's, in a way, good for us, but you think about it, it's pretty wasteful, right? The amount of things we have for each of us is creating a lot of carbon, a lot of wastage in this world, right? So in our turning point, what we are urging our clients to do is to look and say, look, what has happened in the past is past. But from now to 2030, from now to 2025, 2050, now to 2070, there's a chance for us here as corporate citizens, right, to make in our boardrooms what to do about it, questions to be asked, right? I'm pretty sure you're asking some of these questions, nothing new, right? But the key is really, we believe there's a business case, right? It's no longer just about a nice branding exercise, right? It's, of course, there's branding for sure, but there is a very good business case because if we don't do anything about it, our business will be affected. Imagine the flood hitting your factory stops. What happened, right? Imagine water start flowing from the river, hydroelectric dam stops, there's no power, what happens? So it's starting to affect our ability to generate economic value, right? But on the flip side, if we are now first mover, there's a lot of upside as well beyond branding marketing, right? It's things like you can see here, there's upside like you can actually find ways to produce more sustainable product, right, which I cover later. We talk about circular economy. I think it's here. I think the technology is allowing us now to really seriously think about how do we create product that are net zero by itself, right? That has zero carbon emission. So these are areas that we have been looking at. We have big collaboration with multiple parties in the US, in Germany, in Japan, and we're starting to do in Southeast Asia as well, of how to create an ecosystem where we can create product using things like digital twin, right, to understand their carbon footprint, so that when we design it, we know for sure this product that we have is going to return back to Earth or return back to somewhere without creating the extra carbon footprint, right, like what our predecessors have been doing, right? So it's time for us to act, right? I really think it's time for us to act now, not tomorrow, now, right? So to act today, what should we do? In Deloitte, we believe in this system approach, right? Because the problem with carbon is that you always say, oh, if I do something, if someone else not doing something, then am I going to be the person that will be losing it? Because if everyone is able to pollute So you use the word, right? Maybe some people find it offensive. So if I'm able to do the old way, right, and I'm able to keep my costs down, right, but if I embark on the other side, I'm being corporately wise, I'm going to increase my costs, right? Then it's like, why should I be doing it? I really believe that we are reaching a tipping point, or we call turning point, where governments are starting to realize that they have to do something, right? And corporations understand, even financial institutions start to understand that even though they may not have a big supply chain, they finance a big portion of supply chain, right? So financial institution, government are all coming together for a system of system approach. What we mean by system of system approach means that there are at least 3 layers of the system that we got to reinvent, right? First layer will be a lot of things. I can see the low carbon mobility. There were some EVs out there, right? That was the big Tesla thing, right? So how do we get there? But we all know creating an electric car can be more pollutive, right, than the life cycle of a gasoline engine, right, car. But it doesn't matter, it's a system, because we need to then fix the regenerative food and land use, etc. Because we need to fix the whole system, right? And finally, one area that I'm very close to is really how do we reduce our carbon footprint in the industrial manufacturing. And Thailand is a manufacturing powerhouse, right? And that's why I believe, there's this great Expo here, and we can do a part to it, right? So let's zoom down further to supply chain. So in supply chain, right, we try to put it into a very simple storefront, right? And my good friend here, Ken, gave me this framework, which I love. I'm able to share now, based off his help. Is that if you look at supply chain, how do we start? The first thing is really, how do we decarbonize? And if I'm going to have a journey towards a net zero by 2050, how do I put all the initiatives I'm doing, be able to assess them, are they abating the carbon in order for me to get to my goal of net zero? So in Deloitte, we have, I'm sure other of our competitors have as well, but I'm very proud of what we have. We have this Deloitte decarbonization solution, which is a very good way of you putting all the projects, all the initiatives, all the infrastructure that you're doing into a simple modeling to show you in many ways how those with different what-if scenarios help you to get towards your net zero agenda, right? So that's the first start. But that's not where we want to end, because it's always good to have that report, right? That report, if it's not translated to something real, it's still a report, right? So what we want to do is to help clients to come up with a strategy of how to make the supply chain green, how to have sustainable procurement, how to have very clear ways of doing the supply chain operations, planning, distribution. But what's most important is how we design our product moving forward. How do we ensure that as we start building new factories, how do we make sure these factories are able to help us create that reverse supply chain, right? Because it's easy to get the forward supply chain because there's so many years of experience in all of you, to be able to do the forward supply chain. But really, how do we reverse the supply chain to create a circular economy is an area that we are very focused on at the moment. And we all know we get what you measure, so it's very important for us to create that data, that visibility, leveraging digital, right? Digital is now a must-have in supply chain. And it was very interesting because when I first started in Deloitte around 3 years ago, I came from another company, being there for 25 years. The first thing we did was that, look, we need to be the spearhead, we need to really be upfront in the marketplace, talk about digital supply chain, right? That was in 2019. And guess what, 2020, we all know what happened. And clients start calling me and say, I really need to be a digital supply chain because I can't get my physical workers into the factory to find out what's going on. So I need to have that digital supply chain. So luckily, some of my clients started that journey, so we were able to help them. But I'm sure a lot of you have already digitized your supply chain. So what do you do with that? How do you use the digital supply chain to help you move towards a journey of net zero, right? So what I'm going to start with is very simple, right? Is a digital supply chain or a net zero or ESG responsible supply chain is still a supply chain that could deal with the daily problems of supply chain, right? Whenever there's a movement of goods, whenever there's a person doing something, that's bound to have problem, right? I will hope to have a day where we can say, you press a button, everything automated. That's not the reality, right? We have been in the business long enough to know that no matter how robotics advance, there still needs to be human workers, right? No matter how AGV comes out, no matter how many self-driving cars may there be, there will be still a need for human, right? And whenever there's human, whenever there's product, there is bound to have some problems, right? So I listed a lot of problems. If you resonate with any problem, you can tell me which one, because every one of these box is enough to keep you awake, right? So imagine you got to deal with this end to end, and then your boss, right, tells you, oh, I want you to make your supply chain sustainable. Then it's like, hey boss, you think I'm having a good time? I'm every day working, every weekend working to fix some of these things like, oh, I got packaging issue, as simple as that, right? Yes, my packaging may be sustainable. I may be able to make my packaging sustainable, but I still may have packaging issue, right? So it's always nice to say we are having sustainability in our supply chain, but if we don't make the supply chain efficient, we don't make our supply chain digitally enabled, right, to be able to have the visibility, to be able to have that control, right? Control not in a negative sense, but control in a way that we want to make sure there's no surprises. Issues bound to happen. But what we want to do as supply chain practitioner is to reduce the surprises in supply chain. So in Deloitte, what we do is that we have a practice, we have an offering called Connected Supply Chain, which is how we're going to collect all this information that you have in various systems in supply chain together to be a similar supply chain, connected, digital, where you are able to have a control tower, understanding what's going on while you're awake, while you're asleep, to give you alerts. Then moving this information into a supply chain management platform where it helps you manage your supplier, manage your transportation, and of course, you have to internally manage your master data, especially in the ecosystem. Everybody may be in supply chain, but sometimes we don't talk the same language, right? So it's very important to get the master data aligned. Right, then we move on to optimization, but last but not least, if we are able to get to optimization, what's stopping you to go one more step? Using optimization to be more ESG, to be more decarbon, to be more net zero, right? So that's the journey that I see, right? The moving to net zero is not wake up one day and say I want to be net zero. It's step by step, plan what's the journey through a decarbonization platform like ours, right, to understand these are the initiative I will take in the next 10, 20 years. After you plan for the area I am in, is supply chain, is that digitize the supply chain. Get as much data from a supply chain to not only make it efficient, to not only make it agile, not only make it resilient, but make it sustainable, right? It's all many words of it, but ultimately the foundation of agility, of resiliency, of cost effectiveness, or all the good stuff that we talk about, or ESG or sustainable, is to have a well-run supply chain leveraging data, digital supply network, connected supply chain. Okay? So again, it's a lot of theory. What is the best we can do is to show to you some real case studies, right, that has already happened. So I got around 3 sets of case studies that I want to share, right? One, okay, is a simple engagement we have done in India, where the clients just kind of say, look, I have a supply chain, I need you to optimize, right? Standard exam question that most clients come to us. But what we did was, hey, look, while we are optimizing, why don't we reduce your carbon footprint, right? Because whatever you optimize, you are also going to reduce your carbon, right? So what we did was not just, oh, let's repackage whatever we do as decarbonization. Was really seriously looking at what is scope 1, scope 2, for this case, for another case is scope 3. Look seriously about what is the carbon footprint. Because that's not easy, right? That is always a challenge. How do you get the supply to provide the information? How do you store the information? How do you ensure all these things are there? Because it's already difficult enough to get the supply to give you information on their cost, right, on their flow, and now you're going to ask them for their carbon, they were like, huh, how I know, right? But that's where it comes in, right? That's where we have to use some experience and say, okay, maybe they don't have it, but we can guess, or have a very educated guess. It's not that we get to exact, we may not get to exact, but even if you get to 80% of what was the real carbon, it's better than 0%, right? So we went the extra mile of not only collecting network information to do standard optimization, we collected information of how they are contributing to the carbon, right? So at the end of the project, it was great. At the end of the project, not only did we reduce costs to serve, we enhanced the visibility of scope 1 and 2 But more importantly, we are able to say that we are reducing our carbon by 15%, or the client is able to reduce, right? And it's not just about, as I said, marketing or branding. It's true, right? Because it's all measured, right? So what we did as usual as consultants is we come up with the advisory framework, but we also help implement the technical solution, right? To ensure that this is something that runs day after day, even after we finish the network model, right? So there's one case study. Okay. Another case study we have is really a major Canadian food retailer. I mean, we have many of these case studies. Just choose the simplest one, right? Because a lot of them not just use a science-based target, they do a lot more. But for this, it was very simple, right? It was a retailer that just wanted to understand, using science-based measurement, this is what I mentioned, using the Deloitte decarbonization solution, to really visualize at the C-suite level, what is it that we need to do to be net zero, right? Because it's nothing beats having that in a graph, in data points that you can drag and drop, and you can do what if analysis. So that's what we always try to do, because until we get consensus at the C-suite, it's very hard to execute. So this case is really, taking a step back, there could be some opportunities for improvement in the supply chain, but I really urge you, right, if you see the benefit of doing improvement of supply chain towards net zero, take a step back, be bold. Go back to your management, and some of you may be C-suite or will be our C-suites here. Say, hey, look, can we understand better what is our carbon footprint today? Where will our carbon footprint be tomorrow? And what must we do differently, right? So that's what we did for this client. Very interesting, right? But again, if you notice, it's all about data, right? It's all about data. Okay, last but not least, this is a broad case study that actually it's very interesting, because these are the leaders that are not only looking at reducing, not only looking at recycling, they are going the full mile of creating circular economy, right? So circular economy is real, and I think some of you know. I mean, one example very, very close to me is Adidas, right? We may not be doing, I mean, sometimes it's always good to talk about other projects that may not be done by Deloitte, right? You can actually know the new shoe you buy, how much of it is recycled, right? They're making a big push towards that, right? Which is great, right? So actually, not trying to do branding. I used to be a Nike fan, but I'm buying Adidas now, right? Because my daughters will look at me and say, what I'm trying to do, right? Okay, so that's what I believe the world is going towards. The world is going towards more and more demand of us being net zero or sustainable. And I believe as corporate citizens, as leaders on your organization, it's time for us to act now. Act now, right? And acting now is as simple as making your personal decision, because all our individual decisions add up to a demand somewhere in someone's demand plan. And when someone's demand plan can see that tilt towards sustainability, someone at the board level will say, I need to have a decarbonization footprint or roadmap, and then very soon it will translate to a supply chain. Because ultimately, for us to realize this move towards net zero, the supply chain got to change. The supply chain got to reduce, got to reuse, got to recycle, and most importantly, the feedback loop to the design. You got to design products, you got to design your supply chain to be circular, right? With that, I thank you for your time.